Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast. Today's top news headlines today, June 11. We're going to explore the key takeaways from the sources you've shared with us, helping you understand what's happening around the world and right here in the U.S. Let's jump in.
Yeah, it's always useful to look at these reports together. They really give a varied picture of what's going on.
Absolutely. And starting off, this first report from Sahara reporters, it details a pretty alarming call from an al-Qaeda leader.
That's right. The source names him as Saad bin Atef al-Awlaki. He leads al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And according to this report, he's specifically calling for Muslims in the U.S. to, quote, take revenge.
Take revenge? And targeting individuals.
Yes, quite specific. The list apparently includes President Trump, Vice President JD Vance, advisors, even Elon Musk.
Wow, and the reason given in the source?
Revenge. Revenge for what they see as pro-Israel stances. And it's worth remembering there's a $6 million U.S. State Department bounty on al-Awlaki.
Right, $6 million. The source also says he praised recent anti-Semitic attacks.
It does, and even mentioned prior assassination attempts on President Trump as, examples to follow.
Which, ties into the administration's narrative about heightened terror threats. That's been their justification for things like the recent travel ban from those 12 countries.
Exactly.
And the source brings up those two attempts on Trump in 2024 July in Pennsylvania, the one in September near his golf course in Florida.
Yeah, the Secret Service incident with the AK-47 style rifle recovered. So this report is trying to connect that rhetoric directly to individuals and events here.
Okay. Now, shifting gears a bit, a quick update from Nigeria, also Sahara reporters.
Yes, just a brief note. An abducted Kogi monarch has reportedly regained freedom. He was held for nearly a month, so some positive news there, at least locally.
Good to hear some positive news. But sticking with Nigeria, another situation in Benue State involving the military.
Right. Residents there are protesting the detention of community leaders by the Nigerian military. This is happening amid ongoing attacks reportedly by Fulani herdsmen in Agatu, LGA.
And the residents claim their leaders were arrested for what reason?
According to their spokesperson, Leonard Appiah, the leaders Mr. Abu Ayarakwo and Mr. Akoda Ajane were arrested late April, basically for standing up for their communities.
And the report mentions frustration about not knowing where they were.
Yeah, apparently it took about 4 days to find them at the 72 Battalion base in Makurdi. The residents, according to the source, are asking why their leaders are held without charge, no access to lawyers or family.
Especially when, as they claim, the alleged attackers aren't being arrested. It raises questions about motives, doesn't it? And the local council's silence.
Definitely questions being raised in that report. Okay, let's move to a big international story. AP News reporting on a humanitarian convoy heading towards Gaza.
Yeah, this sounds like quite the journey. Trying to challenge the aid blockade.
It really is. The source says at least 1,500 people, activists from Algeria, Tunisia, more expected from Libya.
And the route is ambitious. Algeria, Tunisia, Libya. Planning to reach Gaza via Egypt's Rafah crossing.
That's the plan. Driving through Tripoli, Misrata, Sirtis, Benghazi, then towards Cairo. They say they've had cooperation from authorities in Tunisia and Libya so far.
And their goal is clear: get those crossings open for aid.
Exactly. The organizer, Turkiya Shaibi, is quoted saying potential violent responses won't deter them. And this comes right after Israel seized that aid boat with Greta Thunberg.
Right, deporting her. So it underscores the challenge they face with the blockade.
Definitely. Okay, turning back to the U.S. now. A report on Elon Musk and President Trump.
Yes, AP covering Musk's recent statements.
That's right. Musk posted on X saying, and I quote, "I regret some of my posts about President at Real Donald Trump last week. They went too far."
It came after that public spat they had, right, over the budget bill.
Yeah, Musk had called the bill a disgusting abomination, said it increased the deficit. He also apparently claimed Trump lacked gratitude and wouldn't have won the election without him.
And Trump expressed disappointment, while Musk said he didn't know what was in the bill.
Right. The source also throws in that Musk's personal wealth supposedly dipped by $34 billion around the time of this feud. A little detail there.
Interesting detail. Okay, next up, protests in the U.S. over immigration raids and the response. AP News again.
Yes, ongoing protests across the country following those raids.
In Los Angeles, the report says protests continued. Police used an overnight curfew, made about 24 arrests. Fewer clashes than before, though.
And in Denver, smoke and pepper balls were used, 3 arrests on assault charges, and sadly, in Chicago, a protester was hit by a car, suffered a fractured arm. Police are investigating that.
And and the federal response has been significant.
Very. President Trump authorized deployment 4,100 National Guard, 700 Marines to Los Angeles. Major General Scott Sherman said the Marines are training, wouldn't give a timeline. Guard troops are protecting federal buildings.
And General Hegseth justified the Guard deployment how?
As getting ahead of a problem. He suggested most states would welcome help, but implied California's governor wants to play politics.
Which brings us to the political reactions.
Yeah.
Democrats, Jeffries and Schumer, defending Governor Newsom.
Right. Jeffries quoted saying, Newsom's doing a tremendous job, emphasizing peaceful protests but also accountability for violence. Schumer said Trump's trying to intimidate Newsom, and they're proud he isn't being intimidated.
And there's an international angle, too, with Mexico's President Sheinbaum.
Yes, she said she'd discuss Homeland Security Secretary Noem's accusation that Sheinbaum incited violence with Deputy Secretary of State Landau. Sheinbaum called the accusation completely false, put out a video calling for peace, said her comments on a remittances tax were taken out of context, and she's against violence, supports peaceful protest.
And one more local detail, San Antonio's Mayor Nirenberg saying they didn't ask for the Texas National Guard ahead of protests there, shows different approaches city by city.
Right, highlights the different layers involved. Okay, let's shift to economic news now. Trade and tariffs, particularly with China, AP reports.
President Trump announced a finalized trade deal with China.
That's what the source says. He mentioned the U.S. getting rare earth minerals and also proposed tariffs on Chinese goods totaling 55%.
55%. And related to tariffs, there was a court ruling.
Yes, a federal appeals court ruling described as favorable to Trump's policy. A lower court, the Court of International Trade, had previously ruled he exceeded his emergency powers under a 1977 law with tariffs on China, Canada, Mexico, and others.
So this appeals court ruling is seen as a win for his approach on tariffs, which have obviously impacted global trade.
That seems to be the interpretation in the report, yeah. A win regarding executive power on trade.
Okay, now let's go to Israel. AP reporting Prime Minister Netanyahu's government is facing a serious challenge.
Yeah, a really significant one. The opposition submitted a bill to dissolve the Knesset, the parliament.
And the trigger is this issue of military draft exemptions for the ultra-Orthodox community.
Exactly. His ultra-Orthodox coalition partners are threatening to back the dissolution bill because the government hasn't passed a law exempting their community from mandatory service.
This has always been divisive, hasn't it? But especially now, during the war in Gaza.
Hugely divisive. Military service is mandatory for most Israelis, but the Haredim, about 13% of the population, traditionally get exemptions for full-time religious study. They argue integration threatens their way of life.
But during a long war, with casualties.
Right. The source notes 866 Israeli soldiers killed since the war began. Many Israelis doing reserve duty are angry about the perceived lack of shared burden. Plus, there was a recent religious decree from Haredi rabbis against military service, complicating things further.
And procedurally, this dissolution bill
Needs 3 readings, could take days or weeks. If it fails, the opposition has to wait 6 months for another try. The source also mentions the tragic context. Over 55,000 Palestinians reportedly killed in the war. So this draft issue is tapping into deep societal tensions about duty, identity, and the costs of war.
a very volatile situation. Okay, back to Nigeria this time about labor rights. Sahara reporters again.
Yes, a concerning report from the International Trade Union Confederation, the ITUC. They've ranked Nigeria among the 10 worst countries for workers in 2025 in their Global Rights Index.
10 worst. Stark. And it's the first time Nigeria has been in that bottom group since 2014.
That's what the report says. Unveiled at the International Labor Conference in Geneva, the index looks at collective labor rights violations.
And what kind of violations are highlighted in the report?
Well, Africa generally had its second worst reading. It says in 90% of countries globally, 93% in Africa, rights like striking, collective bargaining, forming unions were impeded. Most informal workers lack protection. It mentions specific examples: violence against union activists, violent suppression of strikes in places like Cameroon, Kenya, South Africa, employer sabotage, bans on protests, including in Nigeria, Eswatini, Zimbabwe, also the impact of military juntas and conflicts in other parts of Africa. Being in the bottom 10 is a serious indictment.
Definitely concerning. Okay, moving to Ukraine now. An update on Russian attacks from AP News.
Yes, overnight drone attacks reported. Sadly, 3 people killed, 64 wounded across the country.
And Kharkiv in the northeast was hit particularly hard.
That's right. 17 attack drones reportedly hit 2 residential districts there. Civilian infrastructure, targeted buildings, playgrounds, even public transport. really paints a picture of the impact on ordinary people.
And President Zelensky's response.
He reiterated calls for more international pressure on Moscow, urged the U.S. and others not to be afraid, not to delay decisions that could make things harder for Russia, basically saying Russia won't engage in real diplomacy otherwise. This follows other recent large-scale attacks.
The source also mentioned something about repatriation of bodies.
It does. Russia returned 1,212 bodies of Ukrainian soldiers, and Ukraine received 27 Russian bodies. This was apparently part of an agreement from peace talks in Istanbul back on June 2nd, with the ICRC observing. A grim reminder, but also maybe a small point of procedure they've agreed on.
Okay. Let's wrap up with several other U.S. developments from the AP sources. Legal, government, budget, economy. Quite a mix.
Right. First, legally, a federal appeals court is set to hear arguments today on President Trump's bid to erase his hush money conviction. He's trying to move it to federal court, potentially to use presidential immunity arguments.
Okay. And the FAA nominee hearing. Brian Bedford.
Yeah, he faced questions about safety after recent incidents. He testified the $12.5 billion for upgrades is just a down payment, acknowledged the system is old, said we have to do better. He was apparently grilled on the 1,500-hour pilot experience rule. Unions and Democrats worry he might weaken it, but he committed nothing would reduce safety. The NTSB angle was that the FAA should have acted sooner before a deadly 2009 crash.
Then there's this Army parade on Trump's birthday, causing some division.
It seems so. Added under Trump involves hundreds of vehicles, aircraft, thousands of soldiers, estimated to cost $25 to $45 million. Veterans are split, according to the source. Some see it as authoritarian or a birthday party, others as showcasing the Army. Trump himself said it would be a good day, and we want to show off a little bit.
Also some budget items mentioned. The Garden of Heroes.
Yes, the GOP included $40 million for that statue garden project in the budget bill for the National Endowment for the Humanities. The source notes Trump's initial list lacked Native American, Hispanic, or Asian American figures.
And Defense Secretary Hegseth faced criticism.
Bipartisan criticism, yeah. Senator Coons reportedly hit him for focusing on culture wars. Senator McConnell for lack of a full defense budget and uncertainty on Ukraine aid. Hegseth apparently said he's redirecting funds to Trump's priorities.
What about the Treasury Secretary and Harvard's tax status?
Secretary Scott Bessent testified he hasn't discussed Harvard's tax-exempt status with Trump, despite Trump wanting to target nonprofits like that. Bessent said he'll follow the law, which prohibits executive influence on audits. A check on executive power, perhaps.
And in business news, General Motors.
Shares rose after they announced a $4 billion investment to move some plants from Mexico to the U.S., Tennessee, Kansas, Michigan by 2027. This follows Trump relaxing some auto tariffs, but automakers still worry remaining tariffs could hurt sales. GM itself apparently lowered profit forecasts earlier because of tariff impacts. CEO Mary Barra reaffirmed commitment to U.S. manufacturing.
There was also a human rights report related to trade. Chinese rare earth minerals?
Yes, from Global Rights Compliance, based in the Netherlands. It suggests these vital minerals might be produced using forced labor in Xinjiang, potentially involving Uyghurs. It linked companies like Walmart indirectly, identified 77 suppliers in Xinjiang potentially involved in labor transfer programs. China denies these allegations, of course, raises ethical questions for supply chains.
Definitely. And finally, U.S. inflation.
Consumer prices up 2.4% year-over-year last month, a slight increase from 2.3%. Core prices, excluding food and energy, up 2.8% for the third month. Grocery prices ticked up too.
Meaning inflation is still stubbornly above the Fed's 2% target.
That's the takeaway. Makes Fed rate cuts less likely soon, despite President Trump pushing for them. Also, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is apparently collecting less data for some reports, causing some economists concern.
And one last military point. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
General Dan Kane reportedly testified he sees no evidence of a foreign government invasion. The source notes this potentially complicates Trump's justification for mass deportations.
Okay, that covers a lot of ground today. A real mix of global tensions, domestic issues, politics, economics.
It really does. From those specific al-Qaeda threats to the protests here, the complexities in Israel, Nigeria, it really shows how interconnected everything is and how quickly things develop.
Indeed. And reflecting on it all, the threats, the protests, the political maneuvering in different countries, what really seems clear is this ongoing tension. Tension between these big global forces and what's happening on the ground locally. And how official reasons for actions often clash with what people are actually experiencing, leaving so many core issues just simmering. Thank you for listening to the Today's Top News Headlines on IMMC Radio and Podcast.